Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 21st, 2016. How you doing, everybody? Everybody okay? Make it through the weekend? I barely did. I don't know. I could use a nap. Why don't we all do that for 2 hours? I mean, everyone could always use a nap. Well, too late now. Daily Kos Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me. Offers tips for flinging peas at crazy fox-loving relatives on Thanksgiving. Thanks, Bill, in Portland, Maine, for sending that starter tweet along this morning. Good morning, everybody. Let me make sure everybody gets a copy of that in your inbox, no matter how you're following us here. By the way, I wondered about this. Growing following, of course, for the Daily Kos Radio Twitter account, but I guess it really doesn't tweet that much more than what I put out each morning to remind you that we're going. And, of course, it's supposed to tweet out the links to each day's podcast. But always a good way to follow along, just to make sure that you pick up on the latest. I suppose if there's any Daily Kos Radio emergencies, that would be the way I would notify you. Yes, it is Thanksgiving week. And time for you to get... Are you traveling this week? Are you staying at home? We're doing it at home this year, which is a great thing, keeping us off the roads fine. Always happy to avoid that traffic. But are you prepared for any crazy relatives this week? Do you have any crazy Trump voting relatives in your family? Do you think you'll find out about it at Thanksgiving? Will you be able to have a civil meal together? I wonder. We all wonder. Much to ponder this week, including the crazy story that I just read on the internet. So, you know, what can I tell you? I don't know. All I can say is I read it on the internet. Trump supporters, Ted Cruz in particular, are of the opinion that Justice Scalia won the election for Donald Trump. I assume that means that they think that Trump voters were motivated by the possibility of getting to fill that Supreme Court seat, and that's what brought them out. I think that was actually Ted Cruz's way of saying, I would like to serve on the Supreme Court, but I'm not really sure. It's also, of course, been circulated as an admission that Donald Trump engineered the murder of Justice Antonin Scalia. I don't know anything about that. I just see it a lot on the internet. But you know how it is with news these days. I don't really know why he felt motivated to do that. It's a long way around to winning the election, but it's just a strange thing. People are saying that maybe he had an interest in the property where Justice Scalia died. He was the first one to bring it up. You know how it is with these things. The first guy to bring up, he was murdered. We're all supposed to think, the guy who did it wouldn't bring it up first, right? It's like the fart in the elevator thing. It's good evidence, I'd say. I don't really know why Alex Jones is talking about it so much. It may be that he had something to do with it as well, but he's not talking, so don't look to him. All I can tell you is what people are saying on the internet, man. It's up to you to decide whether news is news or just something fake. Well, we'll talk about it a little bit today. There's plenty of other stories with additional sourcing, let's say, that we could discuss today. Greg Dworkin called to the hospital this morning. So not for him. He didn't fall down the stairs or anything. You know, he's a doctor, right? Okay, so he's not with us this morning, but he did leave us a raft of articles that we might take a look at here. Let's see. What is this? I wonder whether... I just clicked on this link thinking I got something. I hope I didn't fall for something and just get a virus. I've just been hacked by the Russians. But Adam Bonin, check your Skype account. Find out whether it's just sending people nonsense or what. I probably should not have clicked on that. Oh, well. That's how these things happen. Well, we've just been hacked, so it doesn't really make much of a difference because we're not doing anything here that the Russians would be interested in. But it's always wise to do your best not to be hacked by them. Hopefully, my Mac platform will help out with that a little bit. All right. Well, the levels appear to be 5 by 5. Thanks very much to Justice for that thumbs up and for being there every day to get things rolling and make sure all the tech is working on the back end. We had a little bit of a power outage here this morning that interrupted things, but recovered just in time. Let's see what Greg had in store for us that we'll have to wing it ourselves and pretend that it's Greg telling us about it. Let's see. Well, we got, here's something from Daily Kos. I've heard of that. And I hope it also won't give me a virus when I open it up. American Maelstrom. 5 questions with Michael A. Cohen. Okay. An interesting interview. Oh, the 5 questions interview format used over at Daily Kos. Always interesting. What's this about? It's about the 1968 election and the politics of division. Interesting. So, let's see exactly what it might have been about this that interested Greg so much. And there's also a link to the New York Times Upshot article. Let's see. He's excerpted that here. Upshot. Let's open it up here. Let's say Obamacare is repealed. What then? I guess is the topic here. I don't know if the two are related. I doubt it. 1968, they didn't know much about Obamacare. But lots of writing on the Obamacare situation over the weekend. No doubt about that. I saw who did the profile. They were writing about poor families in Kentucky. And I don't know whether they had established that they were Trump voters or whether people were assuming they were Trump voters or what, but now they are quite concerned about losing their Medicare under the expansion in Kentucky, and rightly so. And it was an amazing list of ailments that folks had finally at long last gotten treatment for, all of which could, of course, now disappear. I just thought that was very interesting. I didn't read through the entire article. It was a little bit too depressing to wade through, but surely some of you saw it this weekend too. It is amazing that they saved up all these ailments and that Obamacare comes along and finally rescues them with this. But I guess the state anyway at large couldn't find the time, I suppose, to save the future of Obamacare by voting to save it. Not really sure why they felt the need to abandon it at the ballot box or who they thought would safeguard it for them. But good luck to you. Hope things work out is the best I can tell you. And of course, I don't know anything about that substantive issue because the rest of the world spent the weekend grousing about, well, a number of things, including the fact that the Vice President-elect, Pence, went to see Hamilton, which is annoying enough because it's a hard ticket to get, and I don't understand why he should get one. But anyway, he went, and the crowd booed him, I guess, as he was taking his seat. I'm not really 100% sure why. And, of course, that gave Donald Trump license, not that he needs it, to spend the weekend, and he's not busy at all, by the way. He's got everything under control, grousing about the fact that people had booed him, and I guess also the cast members delivered a kind of pointed message at the end of the performance as well. And so the president-elect demands that the cast of this Broadway play apologize to the vice president because he's very, very hurt, I guess. Anyway, he also spent the rest of the weekend tweeting that Saturday Night Live was not funny. No surprise there, I guess. I mean, Saturday Night Live is actually doing quite well these days because they've got lots and lots of material. The problem is the material is pointed and it's largely about him. Although, apparently, I mean, his big grousing complaint this weekend about Saturday Night Live, besides the fact that it's not funny in his view, and failing, et cetera, was that it's unbalanced and one-sided. But as I understand it, they took quite a pointed shot at liberals living in their liberal progressive bubbles as well, never having met a Trump voter. It's a nice bubble, by the way. I live in it myself. It's fantastic. And I can't blame anybody for it. But it has given rise to a lot of think-piecing, I guess you could say, about bubble life in general. I did notice at least one comment over the weekend along the lines of, once again, how would we say it? Imploring liberals to leave their East Coast urban diversity bubbles and, look out into the wider world, which is always a great idea, of course, looking out into the wider world. It did strike me that the idea that those of us who lived in highly diverse areas, those of you who live among people of all colors, all, as we used to say, race, creed, and color, or race, whatever, I think that was it, right? And just that you live among people from all, people who've immigrated from all continents, all corners of the earth. I guess not all necessarily, but lots of them. Is it really, and I guess it's fashionable to say it is, I disagree, but does it make any sense to call that a bubble? If you're living in a place where there's a random sampling of everyone of all kinds from all over the place, and by the way, race, color, and creed wasn't a formulation that came to prominence during a time when it was yet acceptable to include sexual orientation in that panoply, but I guess we need to find a new way of saying it that rolls just as trippingly off the tongue, although I tripped over it my first time out box this morning, and I guess that needs some updating. But I don't know. Does it make sense? I understand the need to be well versed in what's out there and meet a variety of people, but if you live in a melting pot, I don't really know how are we redefining a melting pot as a kind of bubble? I guess it could be in a way, but it's not one I feel terribly guilty about. I got to tell you that. Not really sure. Anyway, the weekend also developed a number of amazing stories about the growing conflict of interest for the president-elect, and it's I don't know. I don't really know what to tell you about it. It's not that we aren't aware of it. It's not that the media isn't covering it, though they could be covering it a little more obsessively than as they did with some other stories that I'm sure you're familiar with that didn't appear to be all that troubling. But, we have the very definition of a pay-to-play situation developing right before our very eyes. And I don't know. I guess the D.C. press, the national press is kind of in honeymoon mode, even though he doesn't, Trump probably won't get what amounts to a traditional honeymoon in the sense of all the favorable coverage. But I don't know. Maybe he is. It may just be that it isn't glowing favorable coverage. It's just not necessarily super negative coverage that he's used to getting, that counts as a honeymoon. Certainly the weirdos and thugs surrounding him are getting that honeymoon. Coverage of the National Policy Institute meeting, which is, in itself, just the fact that that's the name of the thing. The Southern Poverty Law Center has no difficulty hanging the racist hate group label on them. But because they're called National Policy Institute, I guess they are, one, able to rent the facilities at the Ronald Reagan building in Washington, D.C., a government facility, and be covered as though they were a think tank, despite the fact that, the coverage was clear. Everything I saw did, in fact, document the speeches in many cases by Trump advisors or people close to the Trump orbit, included long sections railing against Jews and audience response with Nazi salutes. But it's a think tank because Institute. So there you go. I don't know. You can perhaps tell me what's going on. All right. Well, by the way, Ricky May, I share your view for the most part. Saturday Night Live hasn't really been uproariously funny for quite a while, although I thought they hit the mark a couple times in the last few weeks, and I don't see how they could miss given the material that they had to work with. But, an hour and a half show, it hits for a few minutes. It's hard to do. A live comedy show once a week, it's a tall order. I think they do the best they can, but I generally am not watching either, even though very often I'm awake and available for it. And I end up watching sort of a best of clips online as people tell me, this part was funny. Okay, I'll take a look. All right. So let's see. Where are we? We might as well take a quick look here at the the book review interview that Greg recommended to us. And I will tell you, I have finally discovered Greg's particular interest in it. He did it. That is to say, it's his interview. And so let's take a closer look, why don't we, at his interview with Michael Cohen on his book, American Maelstrom. It's probably, I'm going to bet that it's rather timely. I can tell you this. Greg says American Maelstrom is a terrific book, well written and fast paced about a turbulent era, in fact, year in American politics, chock full of iconic figures from Richard Nixon and LBJ to Robert F. Kennedy and Gene McCarthy. If you thought you knew these figures, you'll be surprised at how much you learn about their political skills, or lack thereof in some cases, and what they thought their way forward was during the primaries, and how it contrasts with conventional wisdom about the era today. RFK, for Greg, required a complete rethink of who Greg thought he was. I can start from the ground up. Tell me now what I should think of RFK. This is good. We can program going forward. And by the way, Greg writes, if you thought that political figures from long ago have nothing to teach us today, think again. I don't know how anybody could think that, but okay. Richard Nixon's political skills still resonate today. You can question his judgment while admiring his skills, or you can acknowledge his skills without necessarily admiring them, too. There's room for that as well. And the retelling of Gene McCarthy's primary fight certainly has parallels today in Bernie Sanders' ultimately unsuccessful bid. This book is highly recommended for casual readers, that's me, and political junkies alike. I have a casual relationship with reading, is what I mean. It's a fast-paced look at one of our most interesting elections, and one of my best political reads this year. This was a very interesting election, too, but okay. Let's see. Question 1. You've written a fascinating book about 1968, especially for those who weren't there. I was 14 and remember some of this, but not in the detail you cover. Your subtitle is 1968 and the Politics of Division, which seems to be all too relevant. Is it fair to see parallels between then and now, or were times too different? So this will give you a good flavor of what's up in the book and the rest of the interview as well. The America of 1968, he answers, and the America of 2016 in many ways could not be more different. Back in 1968, you had 500,000 troops fighting in Vietnam. Crime rates steadily rising, and there were major riots in American cities practically every summer, and the country was experiencing an extraordinary period of social and cultural change. But in one important way, there are distinct similarities between the two periods. White backlash. In 1968, you had a lot of white working and middle-class Americans who were concerned about the larger changes happening in American society, particularly around the civil rights movement. This was particularly acute in the South, but there was certainly evidence of the backlash in northern industrial states as black Americans saw opportunities increase for them, and as institutionalized discrimination began to be torn down, whites became fearful of how it would impact their neighborhoods, their schools, and their workplaces. They were legitimately worried about crime and saw the issue through a distinctly racial prism. I think we're seeing a similar situation today, even if the context is completely different. Back in the 60s, the civil rights did upend a whole host of white privileges. That's not happening today. But there certainly seems to be a perception that it is happening to white America, and that the malaise in lower-class white communities is perceived as being related to the improved status of non-white Americans. The narrative that came out of 1968 of a Democratic Party focused on using the resources of the federal government to help black and poor Americans and being at the vanguard of larger social changes in American society has, over 48 years, become somewhat normalized. In a lot of ways, I think that's the best explanation for Trump. Granted, he's more ostentatiously racist and nativist than other Republicans, but he's pushing on an open door of white grievance and sense of white victimization. And that process really did begin in 1968. Very interesting. Let's see. I will take a look at the Bernie Sanders parallel for just a second. If Hubert Humphrey was a happy warrior by temperament, Gene McCarthy was a reluctant one. There are things he would not do on the campaign trail, and he approached the anti-war movement more as a philosopher than a candidate all out to win. Was he an early version of Bernie Sanders in any way? And the answer, McCarthy was a very different figure than Sanders. His issue was the war in Vietnam rather than the economy. And the nature of his rhetorical appeal, which was focused more on reason and debate, could not be more different than Sanders' talk of revolution. I don't know that everybody would agree with that. McCarthy, I think, would have been aghast at the idea of political revolution. His run for office was in many ways about showing Democrats that change was possible within the political system and was focused on trying to prevent revolution, not incite it. I don't know if that's a particularly cogent understanding of what revolution was supposed to mean in the Sanders rhetoric, but I don't know if anybody knows exactly, because it's something that can be adapted to anybody's understanding very easily, and I don't know. It was a bit of a gray area, but it was supposed to be. Okay, even though the word revolution is not really supposed to be about gray areas. I get it, but it was. But there are important similarities, too. McCarthy was, at his core, an anti-establishment figure. He ran to challenge Johnson on Vietnam, but he also wanted to give anti-war Democrats an outlet for making their frustrations known. He was a protest anti-establishment candidate, which is what I think Sanders was at the beginning of his run. But by trying to create a political outlet for dissent within the party, he made Sanders possible. It was McCarthy and his supporters who pushed for reforming the process of choosing a presidential nominee and taking it out of the hands of Democratic power brokers and putting it in the hands of voters. The modern primary system, in which voters choose the nominee of their party in primaries and caucuses, came out of a decision made at the 1968 Democratic National Convention to create a reform commission. So to my mind, there's a pretty direct link between McCarthy's insurgent campaign and Sanders' presidential run this year. The latter wouldn't exist without the former, but beyond that, McCarthy's run really did create a strong anti-establishment element within the Democratic Party, and that's one that Sanders coasted on in challenging Clinton. Coasted? All right. I can't nitpick too much with the word. The guy says it, not me. It's not my book. Buy his book. All right. Let's take a look. Let's find out what was the issue with Kennedy. And the other questions, by the way, just by way of previews, we can decide how much further we go with this. I should leave some of it for you to read on your own so that you can enjoy it enjoy it slowly and in its full context. But there's a Goldwater question and a George Wallace question as well following. And there's only 5. It's called 5 questions. But let's find out about the RFK bit. The most interesting figure for me, Greg says, of many in your book was Robert F. Kennedy, but he was not exactly the character I remembered from my youth. What surprised you most in your research about him? And our author, Michael Cohen, answers, it's funny, but I came into researching the book with a somewhat cynical view of Kennedy. My mother, who was a lifelong Democrat, always used to tell me that she never trusted Bobby Kennedy. And when I started working on the book, I kind of saw why. He was a wonderful evangelist for improved race relations in America, but he was also a ruthless, pragmatic, and often slippery political figure. To me, one of the striking elements about RFK was how much his public reputation faltered during the campaign. His favorabilities went down so much that a week or two before his death, after the California primary, he was running third in public polling to Humphrey and McCarthy among Democrats. A lot of the hagiography around Bobby has elided over the fact that until McCarthy almost won the New Hampshire primary, Kennedy was largely willing to acquiesce to Johnson being the Democratic nominee in 1968. He certainly faced greater challenges in taking on Johnson than McCarthy did, but it simply has to be said that he didn't demonstrate a great deal of political courage that year. Then there's also the fact that Kennedy, during the California primary, accused McCarthy of wanting to send tens of thousands of black families to Orange County, which wasn't true, but also was a pretty clear example of racial dog whistling. But having said all that, I also came away from the book viewing Kennedy as a truly fascinating political figure and one who I think would have made a great president. To a large extent, what you saw out of Kennedy in that 1968 race was a politician wrestling with his own political ideology and beliefs. In some ways, his politics were a moving target. He was willing to challenge liberal orthodoxies in a way that most Democrats were not willing to do. He made an effort to reach out to alienated white voters, often unsuccessfully, it should be said, but he understood why it was important. Pragmatism played a role here, but I do think Kennedy had a more iconoclastic view of liberalism than most Democrats at the time. It's one of the great tragedies of modern American politics that we never got to see, I guess, Kennedy fully flowered as a politician. Sounds very interesting. A great book for the times, no doubt, and thanks very much, Greg, for bringing it to our attention. I'll save the last two questions for those of you interested in the book to read and ponder on your own as we move on to the news and the rest of Greg's Roundup. I mentioned the Upshot piece on Obamacare repeal. What happens if they somehow manage to do it, or if they just turn it off entirely? You get mixed messages from time to time from the people who would be responsible for the repeal of Obamacare, whether they actually intend to go forward with it only when there's an alternative either at least designed or in place, or whether it's just going to be a high priority for the very early part of the Trump term in office, whatever that turns out to be, and replacement be damned. So let's take a look at this. I guess they're round-tabling it among the Upshot writers. Aaron, are you familiar with we're all familiar with the cast of characters, I guess, over there. But input from the round table, if you will. Aaron saying, I think it's safe to say few in Congress thought they'd have this opportunity. But like the proverbial dog who has finally caught the car, after untold futile attempts, Republicans have finally come within reach of repealing the Affordable Care Act. Now comes the essential question, will they actually do it? They've been promising it forever, but I am still skeptical that it will happen. I believe you disagree. I'm going to let you go first. Why do you think they'll do it? Austin, we ask Austin. Austin replies here, I think they'll do it because they so thoroughly own the idea of repeal, having passed bills to repeal, partly repeal, delay, or defund the ACA in the House something like 60 times. Just the other day, Senator Mitch McConnell endorsed repeal again. The House and Senate also agreed to do so in large part in a budget reconciliation bill earlier this year. The only thing that prevented it was that President Obama vetoed it. I doubt Mr. Trump would do the same if given a similar opportunity. Now, I know that a budget reconciliation dismantling of the law is not a full repeal, because according to the rules, it can only touch budget-related provisions, if they care about the rules. But if it's already passed, likely you have a pretty good picture of what it can and can't do. This excludes things like requiring insurers to take all comers for premiums that vary only by age and smoking status, or preventing them from imposing coverage caps and lifetime limits, among other measures. I must also add that I'm much less confident of a repeal or partial repeal without agreement on a replacement. But I'll turn it back to you, Aaron. Do you think the GOP has to offer a full replacement to get its numbers to sign on to a repeal, or can it offer something that would cover fewer people and with fewer benefits? That was supposed to be Austin, and turning it back to Aaron, and yet the next section reads Austin. One way to get, I'm reading Greg's excerpts here rather than the original, so maybe I missed something here. But Austin also comments, one way to get from repeal to replace that minimizes immediate downside political risk is to pass a plan that doesn't call for repeal for several years, at least perhaps, I guess, after the 2018 midterms, though possibly after the 2020 election. Between now and then, there would need to be some kind of transition to whatever replaces Obamacare that didn't just dump people off coverage with no alternative. But the alternatives could just not be as comprehensive or costly. Absolutely, there will be bad stories, but keep in mind there will be bad stories under Obamacare, too. Rocketing premiums, huge cost sharing, and markets with few choices is not a recipe for political success. Republicans now own the task of fixing those things and doing so in a way that does not look as if they're making Obamacare better. I don't know about any of this, to be honest. They're actually in a tough policy spot, he continues. They'll get the blame if they don't fix or repeal the ACA, and they'll get the blame if they don't replace it with something people like better. Health policy is a very difficult and thankless task. I think they'll opt for something they can call repeal and replace, but they could also just let Obamacare struggle and die. Neither looks good. Well, best I can tell you is that is what your punditry is writing. I don't know. I don't know how to take that. I don't know what they're going to do, certainly, but I don't know. That was a very weird read to me for some reason, and I don't feel like either of them put a finger on it there somehow. Talking Points memo is next up in our Greg Roundup. Medicare for the win, I believe would be the title of the piece here. Yeah, okay, just double checking. Sometimes they have the URL. I see Greg's links as URLs. Sometimes the URL is not the same as the title. Eventually, they sometimes change that. But it does say Medicare for the win. What's our excerpt? Our little bit of the article that seemed most important to Greg. If you know this site, TPM, you know that social insurance is a big thing for me. That would be Josh Marshall talking over the top of his glasses, as he usually does. Our public debate is so stunted on this front that you may not even know what I'm talking about. I don't. What, Greg? Greg, no. Here we're talking to Josh. You may know them as entitlements, a term which is technically accurate but is usually used by those wanting to prune government spending. In any case, I'm talking particularly about Social Security and Medicare. I've been writing a lot about the latter in recent days for a very specific reason. Medicare is a hugely important and hugely successful social insurance program for tens of millions of Americans, and Republicans aim to repeal it in about 6 to 8 months, using a mix of bamboozlement, wordplay, and lies. When I say tens of millions, I am speaking of current beneficiaries, but assuming the program is not abolished, the overwhelming majority of us will be beneficiaries in the future. Less appreciated is the way Medicare protects money that goes to buying homes and raising children from being spent on the health care of indigent, bankrupted parents. These intergenerational benefits are underappreciated but profound. If Medicare is abolished in 2017, it will be a calamity. I understood that one quite well. But the politics of Medicare are also highly relevant to this political moment. It's not an either-or. The policy and politics are entirely harnessed together, and preserving Medicare will yield political benefits which will allow Democrats to defeat other Trump and GOP initiatives that will do the country grievous harm. Trump's election has sprung into overdrive, a debate which we've been having in the world of politics for more than a year. Is Trumpism largely about economic distress tied to globalization and neoliberal economics, or is it mainly driven by a white racial backlash against minorities Trump supporters believe are cutting to the front of the line in the race for economic preferment and cultural centrality? I largely put myself in the second camp, but as I think most people realize, these are not mutually exclusive explanations. And whichever side of the equation you come down on and what the Democrats need, are issues that cut across regional, class, and racial divides we saw in the 2016 election. Moving right along, Washington Post up next with this piece, a scramble to assess the dangers of President-elect Donald Trump's global business empire. And if I'm not mistaken, that is also in my pocket. And so let's take a look at the piece, but most particularly, let me see if we can zero in on what has got Greg's interest in this one. Oh, he's right up at the top here. I mentioned to you earlier that that was a big topic of interest. We might as well just pour through the entire article because I was going to anyway. And yeah, big topic for the weekend. Donald Trump's continuing business relationships as compared to what we have seen out of presidents and presidents-elect in the past. Rachel Maddow and her program touched on an interesting comparison. Of course, I didn't see it for myself. I just saw people talking about it. But an excellent reminder of where we once were. Granted, it was immediately post-Watergate, and so it's not so much that there was, one explanation for the scrutiny which President-elect and President later, because that's what happens to presidents-elect, they become presidents, Jimmy Carter went through in his ascendancy to the White House. There was a, let me set it up. I'll set up the Washington Post piece with a tweet that I picked up on that I think, it echoed the language of Maddow's piece, but it came from Ashley Lynch, who I am told is editor, colorist, and owner of GBG Post. So I don't know what that is, but I can tell you can find it on Twitter, and you can find Ashley Lynch just where you think you would find her, at Ashley Lynch, all one word, of course. And she tweeted language that I said was either borrowed from or later reflected in, I don't know the chronology, the Maddow piece. But we can put it succinctly this way. When Jimmy Carter was elected, he had to give up his sole asset, that peanut farm. A peanut farm, you'll remember that? I mean, I was just a kid, of course. I think I was in third grade during the 1976 election. And we were all acutely aware of the idea that he was a peanut farmer, and that was hilarious to us. So I remember it that way. But when Jimmy Carter was elected, he had to give up his sole asset, a peanut farm that he built with his own hands. A special prosecutor investigated President Carter for 6 months, trying to see if he was still earning an income from this peanut farm. It was a huge scandal dubbed Peanut Gate. This is the closest in the last 50 years to prosecuting a president for earning outside money. There's a reason presidents are not allowed to draw incomes from business while in office, because they stand to profit from policies they create. Even if you're okay with the obvious conflict of interest and inevitable corruption, President of the United States is the hardest job in the land, maybe the hardest job in the world. We've already seen this. Trump hasn't met with the State Department or talked with allied world leaders yet, but he has, as she rightly points out, found time to sue D.C. to lower taxes on his new hotel. Then, of course, Trump met with the Japanese Prime Minister the other day, but as of the day before the meeting, she notes, the Japanese PM's staff didn't know when, where, or who to call for details about this meeting. This is to say nothing of Trump's current international business holdings and how that will affect foreign policy. Trump's company, that he has not divested himself of, is already seeking directly to make a profit using the office of the president. It is rather amazing. And if this morning's entry from the Washington Post doesn't sum it up to my satisfaction, I have a few other pieces to share with you. But think about that in context, right? It's true that the country would have been perhaps more sensitized to the marriage between politics and money. I mean, we were well aware of it, of course, but post-Watergate, okay, we were acutely sensitive to it. But there was also something about the situation, the context, which I don't know whether it gets any real mention in any of the write-ups of this, but I sensed it, particularly in the later years of the George W. Bush administration, when it became clear that he had been involved in activities that were potentially impeachable offenses. And rather than directly addressing those offenses and just defending them, Republicans instead insisted that an impeachment of George W. Bush would be political tit for tat, that an impeachment of Bush would be a political punishment against a Republican president, not brought on its merits, but rather brought as punishment for having impeached Bill Clinton immediately prior. And I guess same thing here. Though Nixon was not impeached, it certainly was pretty obvious that he was in grave danger of it, which is why he resigned. And again, Republicans didn't view the situation as an appropriate political exile accompanying overwhelming corruption. Instead, they saw it as political targeting, and they would prove once and for all to all you idiot liberals that everybody is corrupt at some level, and I'll prove it to you by finding corruption in your anti-corruption candidate, Jimmy Carter. Except they couldn't find it, and there was really nowhere for it to hide. So instead, we get a 6-month investigation of the sole asset of which he had already divested himself. And of course, it would come up with 0. Because it's not hard to track what happened to one asset. I mean, it was a complex asset, and it wasn't like a peanut farm, like a patch in his backyard either. It was a large operation with a processing plant and et cetera, but you know, it's one thing to keep an eye on, as opposed to this ridiculous global octopus Trump organization. All right, let's take a look at this morning's entry here. Drew Harwell. I've gotten myself into the name game here. Now, Anu, how do you say your last name? Narayan Swami, I'm guessing. Narayan Swami is my best stab at that. We all have to get a lot better at pronouncing, as a surname from, I'm going to guess, Indian subcontinent somewhere. And I'm surprisingly handicapped on that. There's an enormous Indian American, Pakistani American population around me, but being around them has not helped me pronounce these last names. They're sometimes enormous, and even hearing them pronounce them for me, I'm pretty attuned to the accent, but when it gets to when they're speaking familiar English words in heavily accented voices, I can cut through that. But you know, when they're back on home turf, speaking their own surnames in their accent, I can't duplicate that. And or worse, I can't anglicize it either. So I'm in trouble with that. But we'll let the writing speak for itself. But you should be sure to take a look at the bylines. I always feel like that's an important part of the show, considering how heavily we lean on everybody else's work product here, to at least make certain to... Sometimes it's worse to take a terrible stab at their name, but it highlights the issue for you. You should go look at the link and see for yourself and become familiar with the name visually, so that when you see future work from this person, you'll recognize it and make the link. Okay, so the piece is a scramble to assess the dangers of President-elect Donald Trump's global business empire. And it begins with Turkey, which is not where I would have gone first, but it's just as well. Turkey is a nation in crisis, as we know. And as a remind us here, scarred by government crackdowns following a failed coup attempt and on a potential collision course with the West. It is also home to a valuable revenue stream for the president-elect's business empire, Trump Towers Istanbul. Did you know there was one? Donald Trump's company has been paid up to $10 million by the tower's developers since 2014 to affix the Trump name atop the luxury complex, whose owner, one of Turkey's biggest oil and media conglomerates, has become an influential megaphone for the country's increasingly repressive regime. That, ethics advisors said, forces the Trump complex into an unprecedented nexus, as both a potential channel for deal-makers seeking to curry favor with the Trump White House and a potential target for attacks or security risks overseas. Yeah, that's a good point. And it had occurred to me, but I don't know. I hadn't really factored it into these things. But yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're looking to target anything, but if you're doing your targeting as an anti-American terrorist, what better target really than a Trump branded facility? Even though Trump likely had zero to do with it himself and is simply licensing the name, the symbolism is inescapable. The president-elect's Turkey deal marks a harrowing vulnerability that even Trump has deemed a little conflict of interest, quote unquote, a private moneymaker that could open him to foreign influence and tilt his decision-making as America's executive-in-chief. But the ethics experts eyeing Trump's empire, was that supposed to be alliterative? The ethics experts eyeing the empire. Whew. Now warning of many others found among the vast assortment of foreign business interests never before seen in past presidencies. Yes, this is rather unique, isn't it? At least 111 Trump companies have done business in 18 countries and territories across South America, Asia, and the Middle East, a Washington Post analysis of Trump financial filings shows. And I guess we should note, for the record here, that the number is somewhat inflated, I think. I mean, it's not... sometimes it's to his benefit to inflate the number of companies. Sometimes it's not. I mean, his supporters will no doubt say, wow, the man runs 111 companies. He's huge. He's everywhere. He can do so much. He has such an enormous brain. He can run 111 companies. You should keep in mind that if he owns an interest in a building somewhere, there's probably automatically 5 companies involved, and it's not distinct companies, just the ownership interest alone. I mean, he may also have interlocking deals with other companies of his own, but a land ownership deal even, where they haven't even built the thing, will likely, if it's in, I don't know, wherever you'd want to place it, but some fictional place, state, in here in the United States or elsewhere. If it's in Washington D.C., like he has with the post office, right? The old post office hotel. There's the DJT, or the Donald J. Trump OPO, Old Post Office Holdings. But then there's also, and he just sometimes calls them this, Don OPO LLC. Ivanka OPO LLC, Eric OPO LLC, as we recently saw in one of the write-ups of the conflicts just generated by the old post office deal. So even just the ownership of a one single piece of property is likely 5 or more companies split up among his kids and other trustees and general partnerships. Plus, of course, he duplicates himself in general partnership form very often so that he can shift all the liability onto a corporate shell, and just the personal ownership part of it just pipes the money out the other direction. Anyway, we have here 111 Trump companies doing business in 18 countries and territories across South America, Asia, and the Middle East, according to a Washington Post analysis. The business interests range from sprawling ultra-luxury real estate complexes to one-man holding companies and branding deals in Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Panama, and other countries, including some where the United States maintains, shall we say, sensitive diplomatic ties. Some companies reflect long-established deals, while others were launched as recently as Trump's campaign, including 8 that appear tied to a potential hotel project in Saudi Arabia, which we know is Saudish at the very least, the oil-rich Arab kingdom, in case you didn't know, that Trump has said he, quote, would want to protect. And so I did see this tweeted out this morning with a special emphasis on the fact that he had launched these or incorporated these companies during the presidential campaign. So at a time when he, it's one thing to say, well, he probably never knew he would become president, although he may have thought about the possibility of running for president when he formed these corporations. So yeah, we have a conflict of interest, and it needs to be resolved, but you can understand why he would have gone this direction with it. But now we're talking about things he incorporated while running. That seems a little ridiculous. Of course, now they move on to the issue of the blind trust, which is just absurd that we keep even using those words together. But now, recall that for the first week or so, we all said, well, he says he's going to have a blind trust, but he's going to have his kids run it, and he's just going to continue to call it a blind trust anyway. Now, though, he says, the article says, Trump has refused calls to sell or give his business interests to an independent manager or blind trust, a long-held presidential tradition designed to combat conflicts of interests. Now, policy and ethics experts are scrambling to assess the potential dangers of public rule by a leader with a vast web of private business deals. And there's never going to be getting a handle on it. The whole idea of his spreading things out among 111 or whatever it was companies is to create a web of, an interlocking web of relationships that can't be untangled. The idea, of course, can't be untangled by tax experts. But it stands probably even less of a chance of being untangled by ethics experts. If there's anybody less attuned to this, although sometimes they can cut right through and say, yeah, well, tax experts are forced to recognize these artificial walls between different entities, but ethics experts in their own way can cut straight through those walls and tell you if the same person is behind both, there's no way to have an ethical dealing between them. Anyway, they continue here. There are so many diplomatic, political, even national security risks that having the president own a whole bunch of properties all over the world, said Richard Painter, chief White House ethics lawyer under President George W. Bush. If we've got to talk to a foreign government about their behavior, or negotiate a treaty, or some country asks us to send our troops in to defend someone else, we've got to make a decision. And the question becomes, are we going in out of our national interest or because there's a Trump casino around? Painter added. The Post's analysis is based on the most recent financial disclosure reports filed by Trump's campaign in May. The self-reported data was unverified by regulators, meaning the reports may not have shown all of Trump's foreign deals or assets. Another problem. And by the way, at this point, I don't think we have any reason at all to believe that he complied fully with all of the requirements of financial disclosure. Why should he? Who's going to enforce it against him? They were never going to enforce it against him as a candidate. And now, of course, as president-elect, he can be sure that they never enforce it against him by simply refusing to allow them to. And what's the check against that? Well, the courts to which he'll be appointing judges and later justices, and of course Congress, which is already in his thrall. But other than that, I'm sure it's going to be great. Let's see. So there's a nice chart here of the president-elect's global business empire. His real estate management and branding empire has claimed a business interest in at least 18 countries or territories, those being India, the United Arab Emirates, Canada, China, Indonesia, know how much he hates China, right? Panama, Saudi Arabia, Scotland, Azerbaijan, Brazil, Ireland, Israel, Qatar, the French West Indies, South Africa, Turkey, Uruguay, and Bermuda. I didn't even know about the Bermuda one. I should have checked in on that one. The disclosures offer a glimpse of how extensive Trump's empire has become, including five-star hotels in Panama. I combined Canada and Panama for your ease and comfort on that one. Elite golf courses in Ireland and Scotland, and a luxury resort project. I love that they carried over all the descriptors, by the way, from his advertising brochures. A luxury resort project now under development in Indonesia. Home, by the way, to more Muslims than any country in the world. Yikes. What if they try to go to this luxury resort? Not likely. But the filings, the most comprehensive public documents of Trump's business empire, largely lack details for many of the company's status or ambitions. Trump has refused to allow for a closer accounting of his investments or to release documents such as his tax returns that could provide more detail on his foreign accounts. The companies have helped spread the Trump brand internationally and injected millions of dollars into the president-elect's umbrella company, the Trump Organization, which continues to launch and invest in new deals for projects around the globe. Though Trump rose to prominence as a New York builder, most of the Trump Organization's business growth in recent years has been through real estate management and licensing deals with developers and investors overseas. In other words, ones with which he has very little to do. Many of those deals involve licensing the Trump name, a valuable quantity when Trump was a famous businessman, now made more lucrative when attached to a U.S. head of state. Trevor Potter, a former Federal Election Commission chairman and general counsel for George H.W. Bush, said foreign investors could seek to seal deals with Trump's children in hopes of cozying up or currying favor with America's businessman-in-chief. Gee whiz, do you think they'll try it? Other Trump properties, like most large projects in the real estate industry, are buoyed by a river of loans, including from big banks. But in his case, big banks in China and Germany. Deutsche Bank, Trump's biggest lender, is negotiating what could be a multi-billion-dollar settlement over housing crisis-era abuses with the Justice Department, whose leaders will be Trump appointees. That foreign presence has become inseparable from the Trump brand and marketing. After Trump's electoral victory, the Trump Organization congratulated the president-elect and then, shortly after, posted a flyover video of the, quote, ultra-exclusive Trump Tower Punta del Este, a helipad-topped condo tower licensing Trump's name on the coast of Uruguay. He's got his escapes mapped out. We need to do the same. Trump's presidential biography on a government website, which is, by the way, greatagain.gov, originally included a celebration of Trump's foreign holdings and properties around the globe. That reference has since been removed. Trump representatives would not say why. The answer, of course, is he was using government property to promote his private businesses, and it was an enormous problem. But never mind all that, because he'll just have Ivanka do it instead. Foreign investors have nevertheless taken pride in Trump's accomplishment. In India, Trump has licensed his brand to Trump Tower Mumbai, a luxury condo project being developed by Lodha Group, a real estate giant whose founder is a wealthy politician in the country's governing party. I guess they don't mind it. The president-elect and his children also met with some of Trump's Indian business partners on Tuesday, during which they discussed the U.S. relationship with India, according to the Economic Times, an Indian newspaper. Lodha declared in one promotion, "Congratulations, Mr. President-elect. The Trump name is rising high in Mumbai, too." Yes. So, by the way, he's super busy in the transition. Can't be bothered with the lawsuit, etc., but plenty of time to meet with people licensing his name for condos in India. And, of course, we say that because the project's being developed by the Lodha Group, a real estate giant whose founder is a wealthy politician in the country's governing party, They must not mind it. I'm sure they mind it just as much as we do. It's just that we will find ourselves impotent to the task of doing something about it. They might have the same frustrations befall them as well. Most government officials, here in the United States anyway, must follow strict conflict of interest regulations designed to block public servants from making decisions in their own private interest. But presidents, for some reason, are largely exempt from those rules for fear they could impede on their wide-ranging constitutional duties. Many modern presidents and major nominees, including Ronald Reagan, both Bushes, Bill Clinton, and Mitt Romney, have nevertheless committed to selling or divesting their interests into a blind trust run by an independent overseer with unassailable control. Trump has said he plans to give control of the Trump companies to his children, and the company has said the final arrangement, quote, will comply with all applicable rules and regulations, unquote. How do they know this? They don't. They simply say it. Alan Garten, the Trump Organization's executive vice president and general counsel, said in an interview in September, his focus is going to be solely on improving the country. Of course. But congressional researchers and ethics advisors say leaving the company's management to Trump's children would not truly separate Trump's private and public work. Even Trump has voiced confusion on the point. At a January debate, he said, I don't know if it's a blind trust if Ivanka, Don, and Eric run it, but is that a blind trust? I don't know. It's not. It's not. Trump's global business interests also make him vulnerable to legal risks, including a passage in the Constitution known as, you'll have heard this last week, the Emoluments Clause, that forbids government officials from receiving gifts from a foreign government. A payment from a foreign official or state-owned company to a Trump hotel or other branded company could potentially violate that clause, constitutional experts said. Nevertheless, I will pause here to say the Trump hotel properties spent the weekend courting exactly that from the diplomatic community for the old post office situation that we mentioned earlier. A group of ethics advisors, including former chief White House ethics lawyers during Democratic and presidential administrations, wrote Trump a letter Thursday urging him to sequester his business in a genuine blind trust or commit to a clear firewall between his Oval Office and his family. You were elected to the presidency with a promise to eliminate improper business influence in Washington, they wrote. There is no way to square your campaign commitments to the American people and your even higher ethical duties as their president with the rampant, inescapable conflicts that will engulf your presidency if you maintain connections with the Trump Organization. Forget how he campaigned. It's just flat out true that the compromising and the conflict of interest will be unprecedented, regardless of how he campaigned. The foreign deals could become an enduring target for liberals and other opponents of the Trump White House. Representative Elijah Cummings of Maryland sent a letter last week to his counterpart on the House Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz, of course, from Utah, saying Trump's unprecedented secrecy and his extensive business dealings in foreign countries raise serious questions about how he intends to avoid conflicts of interest as president. Apparently, it turns out that congressional switchboards are jammed with people calling, trying to get messages to the House Oversight Committee that they demand an investigation of those conflicts of interest. I would recommend that you keep jamming them that way. The conflicts have even become talking points among Trump's top supporters. In an interview on the radio show, of Stephen K. Bannon, why does he still have that? The former Breitbart News chief, who has become one of the president-elect's key advisors, Trump volunteered that he had, quote, a little conflict of interest in Turkey that could affect how he would handle U.S. foreign policy there. I have a major building in Istanbul. It's called Trump Towers. 2 towers instead of 1, Trump explained. Wow. Thanks, Don. Bannon offered Trump a chance to respond to possible criticisms. When did they do this? Was this still going on? He still got this radio show and he has it on as a guest? That's crazy. Anyway, They say, let's see, so he offered Trump a chance to respond to possible criticisms. They say, hey, look, this guy's got vested business interests all over the world. How do I know he's going to stand up to Turkey? Was that what we were asking him to do? Trump did not directly respond. After the coup attempt, let's see, Turkey's president accused foreign leaders and top officials in the U.S. military of siding with coup plotters and launched a brutal purge of Turkish critics. Turkey now jails more journalists than any other country, including China, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Speaking of the Turkish president, Trump said during the campaign, I do give great credit to him for turning it around, referring to the coup attempt. He was among the first round of foreign leaders to offer their congratulations to Trump after the election, his transition team said on Wednesday. The potential conflicts entangle not just Trump, but also his advisors, including Michael Flynn, the retired lieutenant general tapped to become White House National Security Advisor. Flynn's consulting firm has been hired to lobby on behalf of a group tied to the Turkish government. Flynn recently wrote an opinion piece calling for dramatic changes to U.S. policy that would parallel the Turkish government's goals and declaring that the country needs our support. Other congratulations, of course, came from the head of Azerbaijan, where the capital, Baku, where in that capital, plunging oil prices crashed the local economy and froze construction on a 5-star hotel project set to bear Trump's name. While making millions of dollars through the branding deal, Trump partnered with a billionaire whose family is part of a long-ruling regime in that the State Department has accused of corruption and human rights abuses. Good partner. After the country's president, good luck with this one, Ilham Aliyev, called the president-elect last week, Trump was said to thank him for his attention and, quote, noted that he heard very good words about Aliyev, according to the country's state-run news agency. Who knows whether that's true. Other potential projects remain a mystery. In August 2015, as Trump's presidential campaign began to take flight, Trump registered 8 separate companies with names such as THC Jeddah Hotel and DT Jeddah Technical Services. Financial disclosure filings show their names followed a pattern set by Trump companies connected to hotel deals in foreign cities. In this case, Jeddah, the second biggest city in Saudi Arabia. 4 of those companies, in which Trump was named president or director, remained active at the time of Trump's May financial filing. The disclosures do not provide more detail for the companies, and Trump representatives did not respond to requests for comment. On August 21st, the same day Trump created 4 of the Jeddah companies, he told a rally in Alabama, Saudi Arabia, I get along with all of them. They buy apartments for me. They spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much. But, P.S. kill all the Muslims. Except the ones who give me money. Okay, well, moving on. In January, a few months after the Jeddah companies were created, Trump told Fox News that he, quote, would want to protect Saudi Arabia from a potential Iranian threat, but added that Saudi Arabia is going to have to help us economically and referenced the billions of dollars the Arab kingdom has made off the oil trade. Give us that money too. And give it to me personally. That would be great. The children who Trump says will take the reins of his business empire have become a ubiquitous presence at Trump Tower, as well as key members of the transition team, helping to assemble his cabinet. Already the family has shown how porous the wall between his business and his diplomacy would be. Trump on Thursday welcomed Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to his New York penthouse, the first face-to-face with a foreign head of state as president-elect. Joining them, a member of Trump's transition team and an executive vice president of his business empire, his daughter Ivanka. And that winds it up for that particular article. I will say this, that was, it was, comprehensive, not particularly forceful. We're going to have to rely on ourselves, I think, in this show and other spaces, Daily Kos, the liberal blogosphere, and a few of the opinion writers to really lay it down with some mustard, if you will. on exactly how ridiculous some of these conflicts really are. But we'll dedicate today to the factual background and expand on things from there. Speaking of the post office, as we did briefly in this article, I thought I would scroll back a little bit. This is something that I've, again, have had in pocket for days and made minor mention of here and there. But there was an explicit piece, probably, I don't know, maybe about a week ago, about the old post office in particular. And if I can find it, that would be terrific, because they did a really good job with this one. Let's see, there's other related pieces around it too, but how come I'm finding difficulty identifying or scrolling to the right place here? Well, anyway, I can certainly begin to tell you the story off the cuff, which is that the old post office deal, which is now, I guess, which will be home to the, what is he called? The Trump International Hotel. That's the one in D.C. that they fooled the press into taking a couple tours of during the campaign, remember, and they took time out to cut the ribbon there as well. That's a big issue somehow for Donald Trump. He thinks that the presidency and the I guess the transition period as well as the campaign itself, are things from which he can simply declare himself on a break. We were on a break. He says, I'm going to take a break from the transition to handle a little bit of business. And there's no breaking from the presidency or even really the transition period. Let's see. Where is, I really wanted to find this one piece in particular on the old post office, but the particulars of that situation are that the old post office is, of course, an historic building in Washington, D.C. And the development inside of it, of the hotel and retail space, was not a sale, but a leasing deal. The federal government, which owns the building and presumably the land beneath it, leased by contract to the Trump organization, or which, I guess, technically speaking, to whichever Trump subsidiaries, whatever he named the subsidiaries that that own the various shares in it, and he owns the bulk of it. But he gave, there it is, he gave shares in it to each of his kids, small shares, by the way. He's extraordinarily stingy with the shares, I think, to the kids. But then again, all the equity in it, to the extent that he has any, if you can call bank loans equity, came from him, and they put zero in, and they're not even on the hook for bank loans, and they still each get 7.5% or something like that of the ownership of the hotel. Here's the piece I was looking for. It's from BuzzFeed. Pardon me. Tough morning here. Federal agency this will give you an idea. Here's the headline. Federal agency doing business with Trump is trying to avoid a massive conflict of interest. It's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, it's an accurate portrayal, and I think they're better at telling the story in this piece in BuzzFeed than the Washington Post was in terms of in putting a point on it, not just laying out the facts. But interesting that even here, the headline has it that it's the federal agency with the conflict of interest. Before I get into the piece here, let me take a look at some of the comments that have come in. We have Monica CH, who's Mommy CA20, remember, that we've heard from you in the past. Thanks for chiming in again. Some Argentine outlets are reporting Trump talked to President Macri about speeding up paperwork to open a Trump Tower in Buenos Aires. Yeah, no doubt that that's very likely. I don't know. I don't know where I come down on it. It's wrong. I got that. But the question in my mind is Donald Trump an idiot and doesn't understand why it's problematic for the president or president-elect to be doing business like this? Or does he know full well, but also know that it's such a novel situation and involves such a novel office? The presidency is unlike anything else, of course, largely because it's all-encompassing. One of the reasons you can't settle definitively questions about things like conflict of interest and why there's always gray areas is it's a role it's presumed that you can't step out of. It's so big and so all-encompassing. You're always president. There's no time for you to act in your private capacity and no way for you to firewall off your private capacity for the most part. And it is likely that he knows this and is aware that even things that appear to be the most flagrant violations of conflict of interest laws would have to be litigated for so long and in such excruciating detail that frankly, he's likely to die before they get finished with. And certainly he'll be out of office by the time it's finished with, and probably be at a stage in his life where hanging on to the assets is of considerably less importance. But yeah, I come down somewhere between I've always done business this way, so I don't know any better, and I do know that it's wrong, but I've always done business this way anyway because I know that although it is wrong, I'm able to escape problems from it all the time, every time, so I'm just going to continue to do that. So, yeah, so here you are. The president-elect of the United States speaks with the president of Argentina and says, hey, I got a business project that would be much more profitable if Argentina changed its damn policies. And I'm coming into the presidency of the United States. Why don't you change the damn policies? Guess what? They may just, and woo, he makes more money. Parlio notes that apart from traditional norms, what is in place to stop Trump having these conflicts of interest? And the answer is no thing. A compound word, which we sometimes pronounce nothing, but there's nothing. Norms, traditionally enough, and up to this point, really very little. Again, the presidency is a really unique office, and of course, our separation of powers doctrine offers an awful lot of places to escape from accountability. I mean, we've seen this, usually it comes up in national security law, more so than contracts, let's say, or torts. But there's an enormous problem, ultimately, with holding the president, who embodies, is held to embody the executive branch. This is why you can't step out of the role, why there's no taking breaks from it. You literally embody an entire branch by yourself. And that's a kind of a 24/7 thing. But our separation of powers doctrine, it's been argued in the past that when should a president who embodies the executive find himself in a situation where if it were any other citizen, they would find themselves bound by the ruling of a judiciary, the judiciary branch, or for that matter, if something had been legislated regarding the president, the claim sometimes is, well, we have our separation of powers doctrine demands that we regard our branches as each separate and equal in power. It's not meant, we sometimes say separate but equal, but that actually comes from a very different and now, well, up to now, discredited legal doctrine, usually spoken of with regard to school segregation. But in a different sense, the same words can be used there, just meaning different things. That there's a separation between the three branches, and that there is no one branch in all cases preeminent as against the rest. There are some situations in which we presume a preeminence for one branch or another, but that generally speaking, we consider it, or have considered it, a danger when one branch's will is subsumed by another. We examine that very closely, and our modern understanding of the presidency is one in which we give it far too much deference in the other two branches. And that's actually probably a larger violation of our original doctrine of the separation of powers than we're willing to realize for some reason. But essentially, long story short, you got a situation where presidents have argued, I can't be made subject to the holdings of a court, even the Supreme Court. It is simply another branch with which I am co-equal. It can't command me, including removing me from office. And that, I mean, I guess it's an argument you could make. I think you would be rather unsuccessful with it, but I guess you could make it even in the context of impeachment. But impeachment, because it enjoys specific mention in the Constitution, we tend to think of as inarguable, that a president could not say, I can't be subject to the orders of a legislative branch. It doesn't have that kind of power over me. Well, the fact that power is in fact reserved to it in the Constitution, that's one of the places where even, originalists and strict constructionalists, presumably anyway, would be willing to recognize one of the clear exceptions to separate, equally balanced branches. There's that's one of the checks and balances written into the Constitution, that the exception that defines the rule, if you will. So what is there to stop Trump from having these conflicts of interest? In the end, literally nothing but impeachment power. And I say that because statutory limitations would be litigated. They could be very obvious what the statutory limitations were meant to be on their face. They're being violated on their face right now. But it would be a lot easier to imagine a litigious guy like Donald Trump and the vindictive people he's surrounding himself with arguing that, yeah, you say I've broken this law, but one, I am a believer in the Nixon doctrine that goes like this. Of course, it's not illegal if the president does it. And if you disagree, you could take me to court, and I would in the end simply say, that's very interesting, but the judicial branch doesn't get to tell the executive branch how to run its business. It doesn't work that way. It very well might, and it might very well have been the vision of the founders that it should, but maybe not. We all have to, and I guess it depends what 5, or I guess in some cases less, justices of the Supreme Court say, and who's willing to believe that. They don't really have their own independent enforcement mechanisms. Of course, the judgments of the Supreme Court were thought to be enforceable by the executive branch. How does it enforce such things against itself? Well, it doesn't. But if it doesn't, to the great dissatisfaction of the legislative branch reserves under the Constitution the right to simply remove the president, after which, well, simply, it's not that simple, of course, after which, of course, technically as process people, we would say, orders from the White House to ignore the impeachment or ignore some judicial order against him would no longer hold any sway. The Constitution says he can be removed from office this way. He has been removed from office this way. He's no longer the president. We don't take his orders seriously. The end. And in the end, that would likely be the only tool available. Now, of course, for this Republican-dominated legislature to impeach Donald Trump, well, it's difficult to imagine. Unless, of course, there is a conspiracy theory of sorts out there under which the more traditional and perhaps more similar to the people inside the legislative body, Vice President Mike Pence, who has some experience there, he might be preferred by Congress to, or at least some in Congress, to Trump, or for that matter, I guess, others have speculated, well, if you impeached both Donald Trump and Mike Pence, then, gee whiz, that makes Speaker of the House Paul Ryan next in the line of succession, and golly, if he isn't the guy who would be in the driver's seat, at least in the initial parts of the impeachment process. Anyway, that would really be pretty much it, because otherwise, I think if you sued in court, and even if you got all the way to the Supreme Court, you would probably find a number of particularly conservative justices, and maybe even some liberal ones, saying, ultimately, we may not have the power we need to do anything, but we can rule for you. Yeah, the rule, the statute's valid. It's been applied properly, and, there should be a fine levied, or the president should be arrested, depending on what the statute is that he's violated and what it calls for in terms of remedies. And now it's up to the Justice Department to enforce those things. But at the same time, the Justice Department is rightly under the command of the president and might opt not to do those things. If that and the courts at that point would say, if that disturbs you enough, Congress has the remedy. We can't direct them to do it. We can't remove him from office. That power is reserved to the legislative branch. If they don't want to use it, I can't order them to any more than I can order the president to leave. I can't order them to impeach him, and I can't even help you decide whether or not it should be a subject for impeachment. It's at this point, we've reached the end of the judicial willingness to interfere in electoral politics. The political questions doctrine tells us, hands off on these things. Have a vote. You have an instrument to do something with it. It's blunt. It's impeachment. It's blunt, and you'll hate going through it, but the question will be up to you. Are you more uncomfortable living with this corruption than you are with living with backlash from Trump supporters for impeaching the man? If you are more comfortable with the corruption than the backlash, the answer is you will have the corruption. That's it. That's all there is. I can't see anything else. So, okay, and let's see, more input from others since I rambled for long enough. Ricky May back with another comment, just by way of voting on this question. I think Trump knows the president can't do these things, but figures courts don't apply to him. The rules don't apply to him. That's true, and now it's more true than ever. I mean, he used to just think that because he thought he was so awesome. Now he thinks that because he's awesome and he's going to be the president. Monica, again, commenting, actually, the project is in the hands of the city legislature, so he's asking the Argentine president to pressure city councils. Argentine reporters were aghast, as they might well be. That's maybe he just really doesn't understand separation of powers. I can't fault him for not knowing the separation of powers rules in Argentina, but I think most people could probably figure out that the president of Argentina shouldn't be beaten up on city councils, but, that's the way he does business. As a private businessman, there has always been an interest, and I'm sure like all developers. And remember early on in the campaign, we read something in particular written by people who had dealt with developers all the time. They just, that's like ticket fixing for them. I know the mayor, so boom, I'm going to get it fixed. I know a mayor. I know a governor. And it actually, in their mind, works better when you know somebody who's not supposed to have that kind of influence, but is higher up, considered to be a more powerful figure, leaning on somebody else. And they can always do it in ways that end up looking like gray areas or more difficult to establish in like a court of law, that something really went down as either quid pro quo or improper influence peddling. It's always stuff like, well, I can't tell you what to do with this particular application or this paperwork for these Trump towers in Buenos Aires, because, of course, the decision rests with you and not with me. But I can tell you this. I can't order you to do this politically, but I can tell you, I know you're a politically ambitious guy, and that the city council job here in Buenos Aires isn't the end of the line in your mind. You want to move on to the regional legislature, or for that matter, the national legislature. You have your eye on a seat. I'm the head of the party. I can help you out with that. I can make it difficult. I can make it less difficult. I can pave the way. I can clear the field. I can find opposition for you. I can cut off the money for you. I'm just saying that if you do a favor for me, I'll be more inclined to treat you well when it's time to move on. And if you don't, I'll be less inclined. And that's just human nature. I'm not making a threat. I'm just telling you, there's going to be more than one of you coming to me looking for backing when it's time to run for the legislature. Am I going to go with somebody I've had the pleasure of cooperating with, or am I going to go with somebody who's been, less than accommodating for me? And, so I guess in some systems you can convict people on that, but in ours, typically not, unless there's a smoking gun memo somewhere that lays out something more nefarious. We very rarely convict on things like that. So what is the massive conflict of interest that the federal agency has with respect to the old post office? Remember that story? Aram Roston is the writer on that BuzzFeed piece that I called up 20 minutes ago. Trump's deal, we'll give you the short blurb before the body of the story, and that'll probably make long story short for you. Trump's deal with the federal government, that is the General Services Administration, from whom the Trump organization leased the property at the old post office to turn into his new Washington, D.C. hotel. Trump's deal with the federal government gave him control of a taxpayer-owned landmark for his Washington, D.C. hotel, but it also creates a conflict of interest that experts say may be impossible to resolve. I told you this was going to be impossible. For the first time, the General Services Administration acknowledged the potential conflict and said it plans to discuss it with the Trump team. Have they had that opportunity yet? Gee whiz, I don't know. Who can tell? It's not a transparent thing, this transition. For the first time, Roston writes, the federal officials have acknowledged a potential conflict of interest that faces incoming President Donald Trump over his high-profile hotel deal with the United States government. That's essentially the problem right there. Now you're beginning to see it if you didn't already know. The hotel deal between Trump Organization and Entity X for the opening of this new Washington hotel is, what's the Entity X? It's the federal government, which, of course, will shortly be embodied by Donald Trump himself. He can't make an arm's length deal with himself for this hotel. That's the problem. Interesting, though, that this is framed as a conflict of interest for the government and not so much for him. In 2012, the General Services Administration agreed to lease the old post office building, a landmark building just blocks from the White House, to Trump's organization so that the mogul could turn it into a luxury hotel. In the complicated 109-page lease, Trump is required to pay the GSA, General Services Administration of the federal government, $3 million a year, plus a portion of his revenue, and he has to abide by a complex set of restrictions regarding what he can do and how he can build. But once Trump becomes president, he will have authority over the GSA and will be able to fire its administrator at will, raising profound issues of a conflict. Questioned about that conflict, the GSA spokesperson sent a statement to BuzzFeed News. Quote, prior to Mr. Trump taking the oath of office, GSA plans to coordinate with the president-elect's transition team to allow a plan to be put in place to identify and address any potential conflict of interest related to the old post office building. Unquote. It's a noble thought. He just doesn't happen to have time for it. And what if he just plays it that way? I'm very busy. I can't deal with this for you now. Time marches on. He knows time's on his side, I guess, in this. And supposing he just keeps telling them that he can't discuss this with them right now, and boom, now he's president. Now what? I know they hope to discuss it with him. He hopes not to discuss it, I think. Trump's spokesperson, Hope Hicks, did not respond to emailed questions about the matter. Everybody together. How does she do it? It's been extensively reported that Trump often does not pay his bills, as you know, and this has been a characteristic business practice of his for decades. If Trump's company, they just get right to the point here, stops paying rent to the U.S. government, or shortchanges the taxpayer on revenue sharing, or harms the priceless landmark in any way, it's the GSA that would have to enforce the lease. This is a little bit of like a microcosm of your question here, Parlio. Under the contract, the only way the GSA can enforce rights is by litigating against him, said Professor Stephen L. Schooner, who teaches federal contracting law at George Washington University Law School. Now, is the GSA going to litigate against the president? Schooner pointed out that the GSA will be at a massive disadvantage in dealings with the Trump company. Imagine a poor GSA employee that has to negotiate that annual sum with the president's daughter or son, he said. Yes, think about that, right? The contract signed. You can't repeal the contract. The contract's a contract. Ironclad. He renegotiates contracts on everything, all the time, always, as a matter of course, as a business practice. Give me $100,000 worth of pianos for my idiotic casino hotel. Local contractor. Sure. It's going to be great. I'll be the exclusive provider of pianos to the Trump hotels. Yeah, great. Hey, you did a bad job tuning them or delivering. I wanted it 6 feet to the left. You put it this over here. This is no good. I'll pay you 30 cents on the dollar. But we have a contract. Well, sue me. It's going to cost you much more to sue me and win than you're going to get even at 30 cents on the dollar, and everybody settles. We know. We heard these stories early on. Suppose he now pulls that on the GSA. The GSA says, in order for you to keep this hotel, you got to pay us $3 million a month rent. That was the deal. Yeah, well, I don't think it's worth it. I think it's a bad deal. I think I make the property more valuable now than it was before. Frankly, putting the Trump name on it increased the value dramatically. You should be paying me. But now the Trump name carries the weight of the presidency. You should be paying me 3 times as much. But really, you should be paying me $9 million a year to keep my hotel in there. But fine. You want to play hardball? You got me. I'll pay you $50,000 a month. The GSA says, no way, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely insane. That's not even within the realm of possibility. Oh, isn't it? How about this? You're fired, and I need to hire a new GSA administrator. And golly, hey, what's Hope Hicks doing these days? I don't know. We're going to pick Hope Hicks out of the hat here. It could be anybody. Who wants to be General Services Administration head? It's an easy job. All you got to do is, first, we're going to negotiate my lease with respect to the hotel and get a more favorable term. Instead of $3 million a month, let's make it $1 million a month, by which I mean you pay me $1 million a month to keep my hotel there. After that, I don't give a good goddamn what you do as the head of the General Services Administration, frankly. But if I need you, I'll call you. How do you deal? You don't. You got to wait until the body politic is so insulted that the Republican Congress says it's best for me electorally to impeach this man and face the backlash from his voters. It's better for me to do that than it is to go out there saying, shrug, I could do nothing, because the rest of the constituents who see that it's corruption will kill me. Yeah, all right, well, when it gets to that point, let me know. As BuzzFeed has previously reported, Trump won control of the old post office building in a highly unusual process to begin with. His company made representations to the government about its architect and financial backing to beat out competitors from better-known hotel chains, and then reversed itself once it won the right to build the hotel. Whoa, that's wacky. Did you know about that? He gave his children a share of the property for free, by the way, and court records show that he had 2 sets of revenue projections for the deal. I guess, depending on who he was meeting with, he had 2 different sets of revenue projections. That seems pretty up and up, don't you think? And we should read a little bit about the different representations he made to the government about its architect and financial backing sometime in the future. Here's a name for us to try to pronounce. Peter Smirniotopoulos, I'm going to guess. He's an adjunct professor of real estate at George Washington University School of Business. They didn't want to leave the George Washington campus, I guess, for this piece. He said that the GSA is clearly not going to take an enforcement action against the company founded and set up by the person who is now the President of the United States! Exclamation point in this quote. How do you like that? You don't see that very often. Kenneth Gross, an ethics attorney at the law firm Skadden Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom, Skadden Arps for everybody else, said it is a bad situation. It's bad. It's not good. It's a bad situation that creates a potential for conflict. Potential. But he points out that the president is specifically exempt from conflict of interest laws that apply to other government officials. Why? Because it's a unique position and you're in it 24/7 and there's no separation and it's presumed that everybody's got your eye on them anyway. So it's almost impossible under the harsh spotlight that goes along with the presidency to simply get away unseen with things like this. But the enforcement mechanism is a little weak. Trump and 3 of his children, Ivanka, Eric, and Donald Jr., own the lease and manage the hotel through a web of holding companies. Trump's children and a lawyer have told news organizations that Trump will put his assets in a blind trust and that the business will be managed by his children. Ethics experts contend that such a blind trust would not solve Trump's conflicts. His properties are well known to him, so the trust would not be blind at all. He says truly blind. It wouldn't be blind at all. And his children, who would manage the hotel, have interests directly aligned with his. To truly resolve the conflict, Smirniotopoulos said, they would have to divest. Or, he said, Trump and his children could sell their holdings in the management company that runs the company and then put their massive ownership interest in a genuinely blind trust managed by an independent trustee. Schooner, the professor at George Washington University, said the GSA should just breach the contract and break the lease, even if Trump sues the government. But for the president to remain in business with the government in such a glaring way creates a major problem, he argued. If this is the world we live in now, one where there is no principle or rules, just tell me that, he said. But if we are going to be a nation of rules, this is a horrible, horrible situation. That's not a very hopeful outlook, is it? Trump faces other potential conflicts of interest as well. As BuzzFeed has reported, Trump mortgaged the federal lease to Deutsche Bank, a German bank that is a frequent lender to him. Wow, I didn't even realize that. So the lease he holds on the old post office for the hotel was mortgaged to Deutsche Bank, which is under review and potentially could be fined millions of dollars by regulators he controls. So he can scotch that enforcement action, save Deutsche Bank millions of dollars. They could, I suppose, forgive some or all of the debt related to the mortgage for the old post office too. I'm not even sure how that works out. But, that's not his only conflict of interest with respect to the same damn building. That is amazing. The U.S. government is reportedly seeking to recover $14 billion from Deutsche Bank to settle old mortgage security cases. Meanwhile, Trump has himself said that his tax returns are being audited by the Internal Revenue Service. The auditors will now face the fact that the man whose taxes they are reviewing is the most powerful man in the world and their boss, and can easily replace them or their boss at the IRS as well. So I said that last week. It will be very interesting. Now, I assume the IRS will finish up that audit we've heard so much about, although it probably was never underway in the first place. But what if they finish their audit and come to this miraculous finding? Not only is everything square, but we owe you a gigantic tax return, something in the neighborhood of, I don't know, let's say $1 billion. So the Treasury needs to write $1 billion check and send it to Donald J. Trump personally. That's where we stand with your business and your taxes now that your tax returns have been released. Good luck to you. Hope you can work out all your other conflicts of interest, but maybe this $1 billion will console you somewhere along the line. Okay. I guess that can work, right? No possible way. And just no possible mechanism for making it work either. Sorry. There's just not any way to deal with it. Let's, I guess we can finish up, with, a generalized view of the corruption problems and conflict problems. We might as well stay on the issue. There's much more stuff we didn't get to from the weekend, I know, but of course, thank God we always have the after show to pick up on those things. And of course, we've got tomorrow, and we'll try and put together a live show for Wednesday too. And we'll see what we can do. Maybe some of this stuff just needs to be recorded and shared with you for Thursday and Friday as well. But let's take a look at this piece, written about a week ago, I guess, the 13th. It's another Josh Marshall piece, but its title, makes things pretty obvious. The corruption will be endless, and it will be. A simple point, Josh writes, apart from all the other things people are rightly worried about, the Trump administration is going to be mind-bogglingly, often cartoonishly, and comically corrupt. All administrations have venal corruption. A U.S. presidential administration is large enough and has sufficient power that it is simply a matter of human nature. Indeed, even administrations run by presidents who are not themselves corrupt are often filled with corruption. I don't know if these are great examples, but these are the ones he gives. Ulysses Grant and Harry Truman are historical examples. He says good historical examples. I'll say they're historical examples, certainly, being offered anyway. But the break with the immediate past is going to be an unusually sharp one because the outgoing Obama administration has been historically clean. We've been living in the Obama era for long enough that this historically anomalous record has started to seem like the norm, but it's not. This is something we need to recognize, both to give credit where it's due and remind ourselves that it's not the historical norm. The Bush administration had numerous corruption scandals. Though Bush himself wasn't involved with much or maybe any personal self-enrichment, if for no other reason than being born to intergenerational wealth. Though I have argued, Josh Marshall says, I believe correctly, that many of the Clinton-era scandals were overblown, it too had a number of scandals. The Reagan administration had huge numbers of scandals tied to abuses of power and self-enrichment and self-dealing. The Obama administration has had very, very few. I think a great deal of this is tied to the president himself and the kind of people he associates with. No drama also, to a great extent, means no funny business, no self-dealing. I don't think Bill Clinton was a rule breaker, but he was an inveterate rule bender. And to a lesser extent, that applies to Hillary Clinton. The endless focus on Benghazi and the largely bogus IRS scandal probably make the point most eloquently. Even looking as hard as they could, this was the best the Republicans could come up with. essentially conspiracy theories, and even those not tied to self-enrichment. Which brings us to President-elect Trump. Trump himself is instinctively corrupt. I agree. I don't think that requires much argument. He took a substantial amount of the campaign money he raised and ran it through his own companies. He practiced textbook self-dealing with his family foundation. Many of his private businesses were no better than glitzy cons, and he developed a reputation for cheating partners. Oh yes, by the way, failed to make mention over the weekend of the fact that the president-elect did in fact settle his Trump University fraud suits for $25 million, which is nothing to sneeze at, of course, but he also, of course, could not help himself from tweeting that this was a very advantageous settlement because he could have been on the hook for a whole lot more. In other words, he really defrauded people out of, who knows, 2 to 3 times as much money, but he was happy to get away with paying $25 million. That's just the nature of the settlement game, but it was pretty amazing nonetheless. And speaking of the overarching theme in the enforcement against corruption question that Parlio put to us, the role of the presidency being so all-encompassing. You know who had a great tweet about this? Actually, Ricky Gervais had a fantastic tweet. I'll try and make sure I find it for you and share it with you. But just putting out there a fake dialogue between him and Pence, where they're planning what to say about the settlement of the suits, and Trump saying to Pence, "Yeah, why don't we say? We'll say I settled the suit, even though I kept telling people all during the campaign I never settle. He settles all the time, but I don't settle suits. I fight them out in court because I win. We'll tell people I settled because I'm too busy." And Pence says, "Yeah, okay, that's a good plan, but then you better not be tweeting about how you're sitting around watching Saturday Night Live all the time." To which Trump merely replies, "Dismissed." Don't need your help on that one. Unbelievable the latitude he gives himself. They are going to take that phone from him. Anyway, he practiced self-dealing, as we know, with his family foundation. His private businesses were mostly glitzy cons. And even if in many cases, they have developed a reputation for cheating partners, even if in many cases doing so in ways that didn't explicitly violate the law. Okay? Josh continues here. He's placing his own children into prominent positions, organizing his administration. His version of a blind trust is one in which his children and heirs administer his companies on his behalf while he's president. His companies are not public companies in the corporate governance sense, but the vast majority of his company's activities are carried out in public. Hotels, golf resorts, licensing businesses, consumer businesses. None of this can be really blind, even if there were an attempt to make it so. Trump and his children are in the process of building a real-life version of a cartoonishly caricatured fantasy of the Clinton Foundation he created for his followers on the campaign trail. Trump is so thoroughly corrupt in his dealings that it is probably fair to say that he doesn't even recognize the concept of self-dealing as being a problem in itself. They say hypocrisy is the tribute which vice pays to virtue. In Trump's case, there isn't even much hypocrisy. In every case we've seen him discuss it, he sees self-dealing and self-enrichment as a normal, meritorious way of doing things. His followers almost all tend to be grifters. In many or most cases, people who bet all on Trump when he seemed like a long shot because both professionally and metaphorically they had nothing to lose. These people will want a bonanza, and I suspect they will get it. I should add here that if ridiculous amounts of public corruption is the worst we get from the Trump administration, I will, frankly, be profoundly grateful. Profoundly grateful. I fear and expect things that are far, far worse. I say all this not really to try to prove anything, because I'm not sure there's anything to prove. For the reasons I've noted above, I think it all goes without saying. I say it because we've just lived through 8 years, which are something of an historical anomaly, and we're heading into an era of unparalleled public corruption. Get ready. And yeah, unfortunately, that seems to be part of the strategy too. Like if we just have so many outrages going on, perhaps they won't pay as much attention to any of them. and won't be able to, and we'll get away with that much more. And I guess no surprise if one of the outrages is an existential threat to your existence, then I suppose that will be the one that you focus the most attention on. And who could blame you if that were the case? I certainly couldn't. Whew. Well, we're getting towards the end of the show here, and I guess it's starting to take shape in my head how we will handle our Thursday and Friday shows. Though we do have a lot of listener contributions to catch up on, and I need to review a lot of them. Unfortunately, I had to push many of them until after the election, and some of them were, very strictly speaking, election-focused. But we really do need to catch up on those things because I don't want to do anything that will discourage people from making those contributions. So please forgive the unusual circumstances. I will blame it on the unusual circumstances. Forgive me for not getting to those contributions a whole hell of a lot sooner. All right. Well, stay tuned. Stick with us during the balance of the week. It's going to be a tough one, but we'll look to do our best to arm you for any dinner table discussions, provided, of course, that you think it's something that you guys can handle without ruining your holiday. I don't want that to happen. It may be best in some cases to hold your tongue, especially with family members, and concentrate your fire elsewhere. All right. Well, we're up against it here. Time to hand the reins over to the guys at the after show and to tell you a little bit about what they have coming up for you. And just by way of preview for the rest of the week, one of the things I was thinking about over the weekend is the way the Secret Service is going to deal with this transition. We mentioned earlier, last couple of days, that Trump appears to be giving consideration to staying, or at least Melania and Barron, it turns out, will be staying in New York. And I think that makes a certain amount of sense. And he wants to return to his Trump Tower apartment as often as possible, but it must be a nightmare over at the Secret Service trying to figure out how do you create the usual enormous zone of safety necessary for moving the president in the middle of Manhattan. He already is creating problems as he decided to hold a lot of his transition team meetings at his golf course in New Jersey, which apparently necessitated a rush hour drive through the Lincoln Tunnel, closing that on Friday at rush hour, which I believe he enjoyed to no end. Guy's got a helicopter. Could have gone that way, but I think he wanted to make a big deal out of himself. So, there we have it. Just the beginning of the imperial presidency under Donald Trump. How the Secret Service, by the way, deals with the fact that his house, for all intents and purposes, in Manhattan, is filled with Russian mobsters, some of whom may be carrying weapons in and out. I really don't know how they're going to deal with that. But hey, that's their problem, not mine. I just have to survive the purge of, Jews in this country. Okay. Well, let's see if we can make it. In the meantime, just to lighten the mood a little bit, over on the after show, it's Metaphor Monday. Here's what they've got on tap for you. Albuquerque police illegally deleted and altered videos of police shootings. Oh, yes, that'll become a problem as well. Probably Donald Trump's a big fan of that. Michigan fights a federal court order to give bottled water to the almost 100,000 Flint residents who still can't drink from their taps. And judges in both of Guantanamo's death penalty cases have ordered prison medical staff to testify. Uh-oh.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's some more on that Hamilton backlash, but real news this time. On the last half, they'll be reporting on rabid, low-education Trump supporters mistakenly threatening the staff, crew, and actors of the Hamilton Theatre in Ontario, Canada. And rural white voters don't hate the actual elites. It's the intellectual mind they loathe. Stay tuned.